Hi everyone, Lance Vaughn, founder of FSI. Thanks for joining us today. This is super exciting. This is our inaugural FSI Spotlight. We're going to be doing lots more of these, but what's also exciting about this one is we get a chance to talk to Caribou Honig. You may recognize his name, specifically if you're in insurance. He's the chairman and co-founder of InsureTech Connect, ITC. He's also co-founder of the HR Transform Conference focused on the impact of technology in the workplace. So workplace is another one of his passions. He's an independent board director with a lot of startups and is a partner at Semper Virens, a VC firm focused on future of work investments. Previously co-founded QED Investors, a boutique venture capital firm focused on data-driven companies. Great conversation with Caribou. Today, we talk about regulations in insurance and its impact on innovation. Let's jump in. I hope you enjoy it. So how much are regulations constraining innovation, or are they potentially just slowing innovation down? And what impact does that have on insurance, the industry or the space as a whole? And how do you see it all playing out?
Thanks, Lance, and thanks for having me here. That is a mouthful. There's a lot to unpack, as you say. I'll start with the context, right? So in 2017, at the InsureTech Connect conference, we actually had, I think, probably 24 states represented at the event, milling about with the audience, attending the presentations and all. And so, part of it was a little bit of a brag about, look, we have the regulators here, we have the VCs here, we have the startups here, we have the industry executives here. The regulators are such a crucial part of the mix, right, as sort of co-equal with those others, that the innovation that's going to be driven by all these communities coming together is very much driven, enabled, and set in the context of the regulators and the regulations that are happening. Now, to what extent are those regulations constraining, restraining, right, slowing things down? I hail from the banking world for a decade and a half and fintech. And so, by comparison, I don't think that insurance and insuretech is particularly hampered relative to other parts of financial services, banking and such. Nor, by the way, is it a free-for-all, oh, I got a new chat message or a new dating app, sort of have at it, people. You do have to actually be very mindful as a startup or as an investor in those startups, or if you're an incumbent, partnering with some of the startups, you really do have to be very mindful of what the regulatory environment is, right? Part of that is you've got to be mindful of the sort of hardline requirements, and you got to be trying to read the tea leaves a little bit about, like, all right, where are the regulations going? What is the underlying goals and intents of the regulators, right? Who, to a person, I think that they are very fair-minded and, fundamentally trying to ensure the right things happen and not be too doctrinal in these things. So on the one hand, I don't think that the regulatory environment is truly constraining what is possible for the innovators. On the other hand, like, it is requiring, at a minimum, good hygiene. And, on top of that, I think that there is a certain degree of prudent risk-taking, right? And look, in the startup land, you're kind of relying on the fact that if things don't go well, you can kind of walk away, right? Failure is an option for entrepreneurs. But if that means that a bunch of insured people or businesses are left hanging, well, that can't happen in an industry like insurance. So yeah, there's requirements. They do slow things down, but they slow things down really only to the extent of ensuring hygiene, and that taxpayers are not inappropriately left hanging, holding the bag when things go poorly, as they sometimes do in the startup world.
Yeah, very, very interesting, Caribou. So, and how do you see all of it playing out over the coming years?
Yeah, so look, I think the long term, right, is kind of the same destination. It's a question of how the innovators get to the long term, step by step by step, and making sure that they are investing in, the right kind of systems, the right processes, the right risk, right, and underwriting, right, to make sure that they don't go leaving, taxpayers holding the bag for underwriting mistakes. One of the key questions I ask any heavily regulated startup is, who is your chief compliance officer? And if they say, well, we don't have one, right? And it's more than just, a couple of folks and some PowerPoint. I'm like, well, you probably need a chief compliance officer. It doesn't have to be their sole job yet, but there needs to be someone besides the CEO, by the way, who is on the hook as the chief compliance officer. And then when it gets to boardroom kind of conversations, right? A couple of companies I've been involved with, we set up processes where, at the end of every board meeting, the chief compliance officer has 5 minutes or more if they want it, right? Without the CEO in the room, just the board and the chief compliance officer, because you need that kind of direct conduit, right? Why do I go through all that? Because that's the kind of stuff which is going to ensure that the startups, the innovators, get to that long run destination, right? Without messing up and without, because it's not about do they break the rules. It's not about do they do something that the regulators don't want, right? It's around, are they doing things poorly, right? Without realizing it, without intending to, but still doing things poorly, that results in hiccups along the way that might prevent them from ever getting to their full destiny.
So, in that same event, again, InsureTech Connect 2017, or now sometimes referred to as ITC or ITC Global, you mentioned that MGAs are starting to become the preferred structure for startups. This was, 3 years ago now, and you may not have said it that specifically. I think, in fact, you suggested that there are hints of that trend emerging. So, how good of a job did you do 3 years ago in predicting the future? How has this played out now that we're sitting here in late September 2020?
So in part, I was really smart, and in part, I was pretty dumb. So here's where I was smart. I'll start by saying, like, yeah, there was clearly around that time, late 2017, certainly 2018, I was right. There was this sort of rise of MGAs, right, of venture-backed MGAs. And there's still new ones popping up, new ones being created, formulated, and so on. And I think that the MGA structure, right, does have legs, does have long-term future for a particular type of startup, right? A company that is looking to create a product that's really in a specialty category, right, or in a very sub niche within a broad category. The MGA can make sense, right? The problem with the MGA structure is there are a lot of mouths to feed, right? There's kind of a daisy chain that you've got to arrange, which means that there's sort of multiple parties that get their fair share of rent. There's a lot of sort of technological integrations along the way. In a specialty, narrow niche category, there can be enough rent to pay everyone and to make it worthwhile. Adrian Jones is the guy over at SCORE who pointed this out first. And I think he was very insightful. So I don't want to take credit for his insight there. I'll just amplify it here. But, it turns out, and this is where I was kind of dumb, that in sort of your mainstream broad-based categories, like your homeowners, your life insurance, things like that, it's a lot harder actually to sort of make the MGA structure work in the long run. Right? Again, you can use it in the short term, fine, get some learning, prove out product market fit, prove out a few theses around distribution and product and underwriting. But because those larger categories tend to be somewhat more commoditized relative to those specialty, it actually does mean that the margins aren't necessarily so thick, and it's a lot harder to make the economics work if you have to feed a lot of mouths along the way. So what's the follow-on from that? Well, it turns out if you go past 2017, go past 2018, and look at 2019, 2020, And I had a slide in last year in 2019 that talked, one of my favorite sort of, Oprah, you get a carrier, you get a carrier, you get a carrier. There was a real shift that once a startup would prove out product market fit, prove out the core of their thesis as an MGA, many of them moved over to being a carrier, whether by acquiring a carrier, because if you've got the product market fit proven, then you can start to raise capital a little more cheaply and in larger volume. You might be able to acquire some, case or two, actually lighting it up from scratch. But definitely the sort of trend 2 years later was, shifting, not necessarily rejecting MGA, but evolving past MGA, right, as the product market fit gets shown into actually being a full-blown, fully regulated carrier.
One of my favorite articles or pieces that you wrote, Caribou, was The Road to Success in the Insurance Industry back in 2018. And you had mentioned at the time, if you had the ear of a CEO, an insurance CEO, and that CEO asked you, if I could focus on one and only one thing and get that one thing right, you would tell them to focus on APIs, or the API-ification of insurance. Unpack that for me. Let me know how that has been playing out, and what advice would you give to CEOs today? Is that advice, does it remain the same, and why is that so darn important?
Yeah, so again, you're asking these questions with a lot to unpack, but I'll do what I can. So look, it starts with a blinding insight by Jeff Bezos, as I think business history will prove there were many, but it's the Bezos mandate, right, somewhere in the 2000s, where he basically said to all of his executives, all right, everything we're doing at Amazon, right, everything that you're in charge of, you've got to basically within the next 12 months, make modular, make each piece of functionality available to each other, right, by API or the functional equivalent. And then once you've done that, right, then it becomes a choice for us. Do we make those capabilities available to the outside world, right? Think AWS as the most glorious example, although, Amazon warehousing and fulfillment by API too. And by the way, it also goes on the flip side. Once everything is by API within the firm, it means that if you want to let someone else, some other company, be your warehouse, right, or be your fulfillment, or be your web server, right, you at Amazon are not obliged to just work with the in-house guys just because they have the same corporate umbrella. And you introduce market forces into building out, right, your whole business and each part of the business. And I think that ability to bring market forces to bear, to make sure really it's kind of a crucible around what are you truly world-class in and what are you not, right? And don't enable or force one part of your organization to subsidize, right, another part that's not world-class. So what does this mean for insurance? Like, there's a lot of different parts of the value chain in insurance. And insurance companies are actually long-standing comfortable with letting third parties do parts of their value chain, right? Think about agents, think about reinsurance, right? So my view here is there's great power for insurance companies in API-ifying, right, the value chain that they use, their entire sort of process stack, right, making it modular. And that way, right, they have the option of, using some third party who might be better at their in-house for some part, or for making their capabilities available to third parties themselves, creating new business lines, right? If I'm truly world-class at my claims process, right, well, maybe I should actually start renting it out to my competitors, because as long as they're going to pay me my fair price, right, that part of my capabilities will get better and better and better, right? And eventually it can be maybe my claims, I build the AWS of claims, so to speak, based on my being so great at it. But that only happens if every part of the infrastructure and every capability is opened up by API. And so where are we in that evolution? Right, I wrote that article 2 years ago. All right, still very midstream. Look, the transition, right, from big, complex, hairy legacy systems in insurance companies does not happen overnight. Right, that's actually one of the big challenges. That's part of the nasty effects of sort of having a non-API infrastructure. You can't just take one chunk and swap it out, right? You gotta like figure out, okay, how are we gonna do all these things because they're all intertwined and a Gordian knot. So it's still very much mid-course, right? I don't think it's too late. I certainly don't think it's too early. I think we will see a kind of snowball effect. So the pieces, parts, right, that make up the insurance infrastructure, right, the technology, the software, and the processes that go around it and get enhanced by it, right? It's only going to get more and more powerful, right, to APIify your own approach as more and more of the world around you also APIifies. Right, there are claims providers, there's distribution partners, right? There's underwriting and data systems, all of which are now beginning to be designed and enabled and offered by API. And if your own software, if your own legacy systems, right, hasn't undergone that kind of software modernization to make it sort of very friendly with APIs, right, then you're going to find yourself at a disadvantage over those who have taken the plunge, right? Not just because of what you can do internally, but because of how much more readily you can plug into the outside.
How often do you hear the term software modernization in the insurance industry? And maybe it's either in your role or when you're speaking with peers or other players.
So software modernization, right? The concept, right, makes total sense. I will admit, in my day-to-day, right, that's not the sort of term of art that I use or run across, but it's this sort of core notion of like, where is software going? What can happen with software that previously we were not necessarily trying to accomplish through software, right? So, what are the capabilities unlocked through machine intelligence? What are the business strategies enabled when we APIify our infrastructure, right? These are some of the key questions that I think are all wrapped up in this notion of software modernization.
What is the one thing that you really want to share with the FSI community that we haven't touched on yet today?
Well, now look, everyone I think is well aware of this little pandemic thing called COVID, right? And I'd be remiss if I didn't touch on that. But actually, I'll touch on it in the following context, the framework I'm thinking about here. And it's really a framework of a platform shift. Every platform shift, right, creates new opportunities. It throws some old assumptions, right, into the trash, right? And it's almost an upheaval for new businesses, new industries can sometimes, actually with every platform shift, be created. And COVID is a platform shift, right? That's the way I'm thinking about it. It's not a computing platform shift, of course, but it's still a platform shift. It still has the same hallmarks as a computing platform shift, right? It still throws a number of assumptions into the trash heap. COVID still is actually being a launch pad for entirely new types of businesses, right? To launch or to get scale, right? Think telemedicine, right? Think ghost kitchens. Think some of the event tech that's beginning to show up. Events are close to my heart. So COVID, right, is a platform shift, and as such, right, you can start to think about what opportunities, right, does that create? Obviously, COVID is a terrible thing for so many people, but this is part of actually the process of like, okay, what now that it's made it not such a stereotype to be working from home all the time, right? As that can't work. Right. Now that it's throwing away assumptions about, well, you can't get any of your medical care remotely. Well, there's some good things that are going to come out of that too, right? And what opportunities, right, does that create for us in the business world to actually make some good out of that too?
So Caribou, as the chairman and co-founder of InsureTech Connect, or ITC Global, I know you have a conference coming up October 19th through October 21st. Give us some background there. Explain to me why I need to be attending that event.
Well, we started InsureTech Connect in 2016, and we started it because I needed it to exist. Right? I was a VC looking to invest in this category of InsureTech. No conference that I could find met my needs. Luckily, I got connected to a guy, Jay Weintraub, who knew how to create conferences, and we collaborated to create this thing that really was about bringing together the innovation execs from industry, the VCs like me, and the entrepreneurs who are building next-gen stuff all together, right? Because there's a certain magic that happens when people could come together. And then, as I mentioned, we brought regulators in, which I think really juices things up. That was 2016. Fast forward a few years. 2019, we had, if I recall, over 7,000 people attending, right? And it's the kind of thing which builds on itself. The more people who are attending, the more you can find the people who are right and on point for what you're trying to do, right? And they call it networking for a reason. It's the network effect. More and more people who are there, the more useful it is for everyone who shows up. Now, did I mention there's this little COVID thing going on, right? Kind of makes it tough to be in the business of organizing mass gatherings. So, while our past events have all been in Las Vegas, right? This year, right? Obviously, it's virtual. We had throughout the first couple of weeks of September, what we call the ITC World Tour. We had something like 35 different locations sort of hosting the typical like hour panel, hour of networking, right? From all around the world, which I think was quite something. And that led into ITC Global. Now, we recently had to reschedule ITC Global to October 19th to the 21st. We needed to buy a little bit more time to make sure that the platform itself, right, enabling this event, what was rock solid. And I think we're going to have a great experience for people. But ITC Global, bringing together, what's probably the world's largest community of innovators, right, all into one place, right? But in this case, it's all into one virtual place, which look, we've all had, I think by now, some Zoom fatigue. We know what staring into a screen for too long sort of drains your energy. And we're mindful of that. On the other hand, by now having it be virtual, I think there's some things that are just, going to be out of this world. The convenience for people, right, will obviously be great. The ability to sort of step in, step out, right? While I think there are some negatives around that, because there is some value around, okay, we're all in one place, right? There is some convenience factor to it. And then the lineup of speakers that we've got, right? I'm not as involved day to day in terms of lining up the agenda and all. And so I saw it a couple weeks ago, and it is just stunning. I mean, we have, C-level and CEOs of some of the most important insurance and InsureTech companies anywhere in the world. Right? And I think that's enabled a little bit too by the fact that it's a virtual event. So yeah, October 19th through 21st, I think there's going to be a great deal of content, a great deal of networking opportunity. So that, will it be the same as, meeting in the lunch line, right? And saying, hey, what do you do? Oh, what do you do? No, it won't be the same. But our job is to help catalyze the industry moving forward with innovation. And I think we'll be able to do that.
Caribou, thank you so much for your time today. Sure. Really, really appreciate it. Thank you for joining FSI. Thank you for agreeing to do our very first spotlight. So no matter what happens in the world, no matter what happens with FSI, you'll always be the first. You'll be the inaugural spotlight. So thanks for getting us started and kind of kickstarting this whole process. Really appreciate your time.
Well, thanks, Lance. Thanks for having me aboard.